few weeks ago, I recorded a Q&A on British culture, and these are some of the best moments and questions. If you don't know who I am, I'm Sam. I'm an English teacher. I've helped hundreds of students reach fluency and gain confidence in the English language, and I like to focus on real-world topics. So hopefully you enjoy the video. What kind of questions are considered impolite when meeting British people for the first time? So I don't think we're particularly unique here. People don't really like sharing personal information about themselves when they first meet someone for the first time. So one thing that people definitely don't discuss is income and how much money they make. So I don't even think most people discuss this with their friends. I know how much like two of my best friends are making because right now they are currently looking for new jobs and they feel like they're being underpaid. They talk about how long that they've been working in that industry and that company, and they think I'm not being paid enough and what their kind of salary expectations are or what the industry standard is. I also know how much my girlfriend earns, but I other people, especially like acquaintances and some of my other friends that I don't see that often, I could probably take a guess of how much they're earning depending on their job, but people don't talk about specifics and they definitely don't speak about it when you meet people for the first time or even, the first few times that you meet them, unless it's very specific. So imagine you're on like a business meeting somewhere and you meet someone who is in the same role as you, but at a different company, then because of the context and the setting, then potentially a conversation about income might come up. But money and income is definitely something that I would avoid when meeting British people for the first time. But I don't think this is actually unique to the UK or Britain or England. I think most people don't like talking about income generally. Another one is politics. So I think it's pretty normal not to speak about politics or religion when you first meet someone, just because these things are usually personal and you might kind of share your political ideas, or like the topic might kind of go on to politics once you know someone a little bit better. But I probably wouldn't kind of strike up a conversation about politics the first time you meet someone. But do you know what? It depends on the person. Some people like myself who are really interested in politics wouldn't mind if someone asked me what my political opinions are, just because I generally like talking about politics and I'm interested in politics. I know lots of people, especially Europeans, like to ask British people what their opinion is on Brexit and if it has been a good thing and why it happened. So I think that type of conversation is pretty normal. But if you just moved to the UK, or you, for example, are going on holiday to the UK, it probably isn't wise just to the first thing you ask someone is did you vote Brexit, for example. Maybe you could ask them what their opinion is, but like asking them which way they vote or their political kind of loyalties is not really appropriate. But I don't think this is unique to the UK as well. The same with religion. The UK generally isn't a religious country, so I think most people here are non-religious, but probably too personal to ask someone the first time you meet them. People generally in the UK are quite reserved, so that is something that you might share later along the line, or they might kind of share it themselves. They might kind of slip it into a conversation, like I was at church at the weekend or something like this. But people generally aren't religious in the UK, so I don't think that's going to be a big one. Age, I think maybe older people don't like discussing their age. So I wouldn't ask someone who you think is, you know, on the older side, how old they are. Let's say just above middle age. I don't think people generally like talking about how old they are unless they're young. This is the case for probably more of the case for women. It's considered rude to ask a woman her age. I don't know why, but it is. I don't think this is too unique to the UK either, but we'll see in the comments to see if people agree with me, if this is normal or if it isn't normal. But asking people their age for some reason is not a polite thing to do either. I would say relationships is the final one. I don't think people appreciate it when other people, especially strangers, pry into people's personal lives. So they kind of maybe dig a little bit too deep. So I think if you ask someone, are you single or are you married, then probably if you ask them, are you married, this is probably a better question to ask than are you single, because someone might interpret are you single as are you available? And then that could definitely be interpreted in the wrong way. But asking someone about their relationships isn't probably wise. And not just romantic relationships either. I wouldn't really ask about any relationships they have in terms of, are you close with your mom? Are you close with your dad? Are you close with your like brothers and sisters? Or even really about their friendships, just because that's quite a personal thing as well. So I would probably stay away from those 5 topics: income, politics, religion, age, and relationships. But I don't know if these are too unique to the UK, but we'll find out afterwards. Before we go on to the next question, I just want to tell you about my free English learning community. If you join for free, you will have access to these Q&A calls. You can join, you can ask questions, and also there are loads of other things that you can get all for free. So have a look in the description or the pinned comment, and you will find a link on how to join our free English learning community. Okay, back to the video. How emotional or reserved are people in British culture? I think British people generally are more reserved than the average nation, and we often have a tendency to understate things. So we could say I'm not too bad. Or if someone asked me how my meeting went or how my interview went, instead of saying it went well or it went good or it went great, a lot of people would understate things, saying it didn't go too bad. So for some reason, or if they have a problem, they might say, I have a little bit of a problem, or I have a bit of a problem, when the problem is actually quite serious. So there's usually a tendency to understate things. We don't really reveal too much about ourselves unless you know someone quite well. So those topics I talked about before, we don't really tend to talk about those things unless you get close with them. Sometimes you just find out automatically through how conversations go. So a conversation might automatically kind of just end up talking about politics or a political situation that might be happening at the current time. And then you might find out more about how they think and what they think about certain things just naturally. But there's not like a direct, you don't really ask people directly what they think about things. So we're quite reserved. We understate things a lot, and we don't like confrontation or problems happening. And I think a lot of British people would probably quite happily ignore something that's happening, which could be understood as confrontational. Or if someone is being too emotional in public, in terms of, we don't like it when people get angry or show anger in public, and we find it all a little bit too awkward, and we might kind of just like sink into ourselves and not really intervene too much. If someone is getting harassed, I think then people would probably step in, I would like to think. But in terms of someone getting angry at someone else, imagine you're at a restaurant and someone's shouting at their kids, then we don't really like that. And if you're in that environment, people find that uncomfortable. The same with if someone is upset and crying. I think a lot of people would just prefer just to ignore that is happening rather than confront it and try and make that person feel better, which is a bit unfortunate because people usually understand British people as being polite. But I think, especially in cities, people would quite happily walk past someone crying and not intervene or ask them how they are. But it depends on their personality. There are a lot of people who are really kind and caring and supportive, and they will ask random people, why they are upset, for example, or if they can help in any way. And that probably happens more outside of cities, and the more north you go in the UK, generally northerners are more friendly than southerners for some reason. So I think if you were crying in public in Manchester, people were probably more likely to stop you and ask you if you're okay, rather than if you were crying in public in London, where 1,000 people could walk past you and no one would even, care. They would just look at you, think, oh, that woman's crying. Let's continue walking. So that's how we are with emotions. People don't really like to show emotions, especially boastful and proud emotions. We have a thing here called like a tall poppy syndrome, where we don't like people who are too confident, and maybe they love themselves or like themselves a little bit too much. We understand confidence as usually
arrogance and cockiness. And British people really don't like that when people are so proud of themselves. We kind of just we think that is a really dislikable characteristic. So if someone is talking about how good they are, we generally just don't like it. In terms of vulnerability, I think people really do appreciate vulnerability in society. So even if there is a celebrity who is, rich and famous and they don't have too many problems happening in their life, then even if they kind of show a moment of vulnerability and they cry on TV or something and they talk about it's like a really deep problem which is affecting them, then people will definitely get on board and feel sorry for them if that's kind of if the appropriate response. But yeah, people appreciate vulnerability as long as it's not too much and too intense and at the right time. But in terms of our emotions, we usually keep them to ourselves. I'd say we're more on the reserved side than open side. We're quite shy when it comes to meeting people. So, for example, Spanish people quite often get quite physical when they meet people for the first time with a kiss on the cheek or something like that. British people definitely don't do anything like that. A handshake between men is quite common. A small hug between like a man and a woman is quite common, but sometimes it might just be like a wave. So yeah, we're quite reserved. We usually wait until we know someone a little bit better before we reveal too much about ourselves or definitely show too much emotion, which is quite interesting.
People in London are really antisocial. Is that correct?
Yeah. I will link a video in the community afterwards, but I found a video on the North-South divide, and there's kind of a joke in there, and the joke was something along the lines of Northerner in London is causing terror and like fear in the local population by saying hello to them and asking how they are. So there is a stereotype and a generalization that Londoners in particular are very I don't even know what the correct word is, but they are very uninterested in other people's lives, and yeah, they don't take too much. They don't like place too much attention on other people. Very antisocial is probably the word. Depending, in your friendship group, people aren't antisocial, or at work they won't be antisocial. But in terms of other people, random people on the streets, on the bus, there's not too much kind of communication. It's just an understanding that, I'm a human, you're a human, you're getting on with your life, I'm getting on with my life, I think. But that's usually the case in cities. I think more every city it's more like that than it is in rural areas. But in London, it's particularly bad. But I think in New York, it'd be quite similar.
How does politeness play a role in British interactions?
So I know in other cultures and languages, it's quite common to be direct when you're especially asking someone to do something for you. So we don't like to bother people. We don't like to get in the way of people. We don't like to ask people to do things for us. We don't like to feel like we're overstepping our demands or asks. There are other cultures where it's quite common just to try and get the most out of someone, especially if you're paying money. But in in the UK, it's not like that. Even if you're paying money, especially if you have like some builders around at your house, you don't want to ask them to do something which could be asking a little bit too much of them, for example. So and we usually ask this in very kind of indirect or permission based ways. So if I was in a restaurant and I wanted to order a pizza, but I wanted to get the mushrooms removed from the pizza, I might ask it like this, like, is it possible if I can have the mushrooms taken off the pizza? Or I was wondering, can I have the mushrooms taken off the pizza? So it's not a demand, it's not very direct. It's asking if it's okay with them. So we don't like to overstep the mark. And I will talk about this a little bit more in the next question, but we also kind of put a lot of emphasis on manners. And when I say manners, I'm talking about excuse me, please, and thank you. So a lot of questions will be ended with the word please, or it will begin, or these questions will begin with the word please. And often it's expected to say thank you. If you hold a door open for someone and they don't say thank you, then a lot of people would be quite annoyed and angry at that person and consider that rude. So being polite usually just revolves around not being direct, not demanding, not overstepping your ask, and also by remembering your manners. So that is something that parents often say to like children where are your manners? So if they ask a question and they don't say please, they don't say thank you, the parents often, or adults usually, put an emphasis on asking things or saying things in a polite way. So that is very much ingrained into British society. If you come here and you don't say please, thank you, and excuse me, and you're kind of quite demanding with staff or other people, then people will consider you impolite and rude.
What topics should we talk about when meeting a British person for the first time?
Yeah, I think general small talk topics expected. So weather, travel, food, the local area, maybe even current affairs, if maybe not current affairs because it's a bit too political, but general small talk things. So entertainment, film, TV, I think that's a big one, especially like TV series. Lots of people watch TV series now, and usually there's like a big hit out every one time of the year. So we're talking about TV is a big one. Weather is a big one in the UK. A lot of people kind of start conversations talking about the weather, and it usually just transcends into something else. But sport is another one. I remember like seeing a tweet saying a new lad just started at work and he told me he didn't like football, so now we have nothing to talk about. So so yeah, sport is a big one, especially football in the UK, mostly men, but the women's game is becoming more popular. But definitely men's football is a big topic here. So yeah, those small talk topics I think are safe grounds.
What is indirect speech, and why do British people use it so much?
I think going back to my previous answer, people don't like confrontation. They don't like upsetting people. They don't like causing anger or kind of sadness. So people will let people down gently, and usually that might come along with a white lie. So they might tell them something that isn't entirely true just to make the situation a little bit easier to deal with on both parts. And sometimes the other person knows that they're kind of lying, or maybe not lying, but maybe the other person might understand that they're not being direct and truthful, and they might interpret in their heads that they actually don't want to do that thing, or they don't want to have a meeting with that person. So, but they will never, I don't think it's very common for them to follow up with a challenge because British people don't like confrontation. They don't like people being angry or upset. So yeah, I think it's pretty common to lie and be indirect, which is quite strange. So it's like you there would be so many situations where friends around friendship groups in the UK this weekend, someone will make some plans or suggest something. And instead of someone just saying, no, I don't want to do that, or no, I don't want to hang out with people this weekend, or I don't want to see you this weekend, they will invent some type of lie just to kind of not go. So, oh, I'm busy, I'm doing this with my family or something like this, which I think if instead of saying no, I don't want to see you directly, that's pretty understandable because that might cause offense. But it's people don't really put out their honest needs. So some people might be really socially tired from work. They might be drained from work or something big happened this weekend. And instead of saying, no, I don't want to go out drinking this weekend, they will come up with some excuse instead. So I think excuse is probably the right word. They will invent some type of excuse to get out of obligations, all due to the desire not to cause confrontation. That happens a lot with decision making. People don't like to give answers and they don't like to upset them or let them down face to face or on a call. So people would prefer to give some small answer like that. I need to have a think about it, or I need to check my calendar, or I need to check with this person, and they will say that type of thing instead of just, no, I can't do that. No, I don't want to do that. So they would prefer to text them afterwards, email them afterwards saying that's not possible, I can't do that, or they need to buy themselves some time to think of an excuse, which is probably the usual case, is that they don't know what their excuse is right now, but they will definitely think of one. But yeah, that's a good point, Anna. They definitely do lie about that type of thing of just saying I need to think about it, or I need to check my calendar, or I need to do something before I give you an answer.
What do you do next when you get this kind of evasive answer?
It depends on how close I was with that friend. So if I was really close to that friend and we have like an authentic friendship, then I would just say, answer me honestly. If you don't want to do this, it's fine. I won't be offended. Just let me know so I know. I would prefer to know something and it not to be the right answer in most cases than kind of be waiting and seeing what their response is. I don't like pestering people. I don't want to make someone do something that they don't want to do. So for me, depending on the friendship and depending on the person, I would just say, can I be honest with me now? If you want to do this or don't want to do this, I don't mind either way. Even if I do mind, like I said, I don't want to make someone do something they don't want to do. But usually, if you ask someone and the response is not like strong or overwhelming, or you can't really interpret it in a way that they want to do it, you can kind of just guess by the way that they respond to it. So if they're not showing too much enthusiasm, then you can probably get a hint that, or they offer up maybe some excuses like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing that weekend. Then you can kind of get it that they don't want to do it. So depending on the friendship and the personality, they might just interpret that as, oh, that person doesn't want to do it, so I'm not going to ask them again. They might kind of just check, like, oh, I am going to the cinema on Friday. I'm just kind of checking, did you want to come? And then they might come up with some final excuse like, oh no, I'm babysitting, or I'm doing something that kind of evening. So, but yeah, I think it depends on the person. I think I'm a little bit more kind of authentic with my friendships and other people, but it depends on the person. Like if it's someone I don't know too well, I may do that thing where I'm like, oh, I actually, I don't know what I'm doing that weekend. So I definitely do that, and I think most people do. But yeah, with my close friends, it's not like that.
What could generally bother people in the UK?
Queues and lines. People really respect a queue and a line in the UK. People hate people who jump the queue. And this will really annoy every single person, even if you're queuing up for a music event or something, and some of your friends are like further ahead in the queue and you've just joined the queue and you just jump in with them. People do that, but people really dislike it and they will be annoyed at you. I've seen people push in to queues at like nightlife events or like a music event, and people have just like thrown things at them like cups, and because it maybe depending on how long they've been waiting in the queue, it could really annoy people. So respect the queues, respect the lines, because people don't like queue jumpers. Apart from pubs, in pubs there are no queues. There is this weird thing that's happening where queues are actually forming in pubs, but there's no such thing as a queue in a pub. That's culturally understood, especially by normal pub goers or seasoned pub goers. Basically, you just go to the bar and you just queue up at the kind of, and well, you don't queue up, but you kind of just like fight to get to the front of the bar. Like obviously it's quite wide usually, so you go to the left or the right or the middle. You just kind of find where the most space is and get as close to the front as possible. And then there's just this like weird competition where you're all trying to make eye contact with the bartender to try and kind of show them, look, I'm here, can you serve me next or whatever. But no queues or lines in pubs. People don't like loud people, especially in environments that are a little bit more relaxed and intimate. In a restaurant, if you're in a restaurant and the person next to you has a really loud voice and they're speaking really loud and you can hear everything that they're saying, that really annoys me. Or a flight or a train, people just generally dislike loud people in public. So that's another one, is kind of make sure that you're not really loud and disturbing. So that's one. Kind of what I said before, directness. If you are speaking to staff of some description or speaking to anyone, be polite when you ask questions. Don't be direct. Don't be demanding. Don't overstep your ask. I think if you just try and be as polite as possible and ask in a polite and compassionate and empathetic way, just feel like you're bothering them. So even if someone's job is to do what they're doing, ask them a question as if you're making them go out of their way to do it, or you're bothering them. That's how is a good, probably general rule. Manners, again, say please, say thank you, say excuse me, and yeah, someone holds the door open, don't just walk in, say thank you. And then the last one, kind of hinted at this as well, but boasting. People don't like people talking about how good they are or how good their country is, or if you come to the UK and you go, oh, the food in the UK is really bad, it's so much better in America. People won't like that, even if it's true. So don't talk about how good you are or how good kind of something associated with you is. Also, don't talk loudly about money or how much you earn, because people won't like that either. But I think that's generally it. I don't think there's any two other unique things about Britain and what annoys British people. I think, yeah, the queues and the lines are probably the most unique thing. That's why a lot of British people don't like Americans, is because they think they're loud. And I wasn't going to say that specifically, but I was thinking in my head, Americans, they usually tend to be a bit louder than other countries. So I can definitely see a group of Americans in a restaurant speaking loudly, especially if they look successful or rich. People will dislike them, especially if they're talking proudly and boasting as well. Like, that is just a recipe for being disliked. But like I said, British people aren't confrontational. They probably won't go over to them and say, sorry, excuse me, can you just quieten down a bit? They will just resent them in their head.